السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. يسرنا حضوركم اليوم لأولى حوارات التجربة الحكومية بعنوان التقارب من المنظور الإنساني، والتي يلقيها السيد زولتان استفان المستشرف والكاتب العالمي. حوارات التجربة الحكومية GXTalks هي منصة تفاعلية لتبادل أفضل الممارسات الرائدة في تقديم الخدمات الحكومية من خلال الاستفادة من إمكانات الحوار المفتوح. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We are pleased to have you here with us today in our first GX Talks with the title of Convergence, a Transhumanist Perspective by Mr. Zoltan Estevan, a leading international futurist and a writer. GX Talks is a platform for exchanging the best practices in the field of service improvement. By harnessing the power of open dialogue, we are uniting practitioners and innovators to lead the next frontier in government experience design and delivery. Please, let's welcome Mr. Zoltan Estefan to the stage.
I'll be, okay, thank you so much. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm actually very honored to be part of the inaugural speech because I understand you're going to be having a number of these government experience talks, and I'm honored to be the first one. As she mentioned, my name is Zoltan Istvan, and one thing that I don't think was mentioned was that I have been a 2016 U.S. presidential candidate as well as a 2018 Libertarian candidate for governor in California. So I've just finished essentially 4 years of political campaigning, and of course when you're running for office, one of the things you do is focus a lot on how to improve government services, how to do better for the citizenry, how to make the world a better place through politics and government. And so as a result, I've had a lot of experience kind of on the ground in dealing with policies, teams behind me as we work out how to essentially improve the world. But what I've become known for, and also what my campaign centered around, is a field that is emerging all around the world right now and really taking the world culturally by storm. It's this idea that we have to use radical science and technology to modify the human being and also to modify the human experience. It's something that's incredibly powerful. It can be anything from exoskeleton suits that get disabled people out of wheelchairs. It can be things like brain implants that we can communicate directly to one another with. It can also be things like, simple things like driverless cars. But whatever it is, transhumanism is a social movement right now of tens of millions of people around the world that want to use radical science and technology to improve the human body dramatically. And it's, I understand a lot of people have been talking about it in Dubai, but of course a lot of people are talking about it everywhere around the world. And how that relates into government services and to just running governments is really about the idea that we're going to become, probably in the next 10 to 20 to 30 years, modified through machines and modified through different types of mechanical parts in our bodies, as well as maybe genetic editing, which essentially will qualify us as cyborgs. And how can we use the coming age of cyborgism essentially to apply to essentially government services? Well, this is, we'll get into this, but essentially the first thing to understand is we are sort of transforming ourselves as a species through radical science and technology. One of the things that's going to be happening everywhere around the world is more and more we're putting things inside our bodies, and we're using things outside of our bodies to help us. In America, for example, where I'm from, 30% of the people have mobility issues, whether they're senior citizens or they just are disabled. But we are now coming across with technologies that can literally get people out of the wheelchairs, literally get people walking again. It's possible that we might have 80-year-olds in the future that try to do things like climb Mount Everest. And all that is happening because of radical transhumanist technology. But of course, it also applies to your areas of government experience and government service. Now, one of the, most important fields, I think, in terms of government experience is the idea of probably having some type of device on us that can register services and facilitate the use of services dramatically. Now, I have a small chip implant in my hand, and later, if you want to come up with me, I'll show you what it's all about. But basically, people all around the world, I'm not sure how much in Dubai, there are probably 80,000 people around the world right now with a small implant in their hands that allows them to do certain things like get rid of their keys, pay with their chip in their hands, and things like that. You know, 3 years ago, I was one of the very first people in the world to get this implant, which is tiny. It's about the size of a grain of rice. Here's me getting the implant. I was actually running for president at the moment, and this is what they look like. And maybe you've been reading the news that all of a sudden the United Kingdom is thinking about putting a lot of their employees with these kinds of implants. Well, the implants are really good for a lot of different reasons. They can help you pay very quickly so you don't need a wallet. I can open my front door with my implant by just waving my hand. It also contains all your serial number and all sorts of information. Some people have even put passports into their hands. Other people have put driver's licenses, and other people have put just different types of passwords and passcodes, and even can trade Bitcoin currencies and things like that on it. So there's a lot of different things you can do with a small implant in your hand. Just imagine that this little implant, and it's very cheap too. You know, the iPhone costs about $1,000 now, but the implant only costs about 30 or 40 US dollars. And yet, the implant can do about 25% of the things that your iPhone can do. So most futurists tend to think that implant technology is something that's going to catch on quite dramatically and make services around the world a lot more, I guess, functional and expedient. But you know, if you don't like putting things in your body, it's not just implants, it's also eye scanning devices. There's also even tiny tattoos and little stickers that you can put on your hand that act in the same way as implants. But all these different types of technologies are coming together in a way that would allow you to facilitate services and make it so that you can streamline different types of products and ideas on how you might run a government. Of course, the big worry about implants, we can talk more about that later, is whether you're being tracked, whether you lose your privacy, whether you want something in your body that the government, you know, has access to. But those are challenges that I think everybody has to ask themselves. Of course, it goes further than just implants. This is what people have today, and I suspect probably 200,000 people will have it by the end of 18 months from now, maybe 1 million. It depends on how fast it catches on. But the real question is, when will we start getting implants that are either attached to our brains or headsets and things like that? So right now in California, we have two $100 million companies. One is owned by Elon Musk, another by Brian Johnson at Kernel, and they are working on what we call Neuralink or neural implants that would allow you to connect your brain directly to the web or directly to machine intelligence. This is very important because at some point in the future, if we want to retain our jobs and we want to have instantaneous communication with each other, we don't have to pick up our phones. We can just think thoughts that go directly to one another. And like I said, there are now $200 million companies working on it. And actually, there are probably many more companies. I've heard that Google and Apple are also working on it. I mean, Apple's ultimate goal is, you know, as Steve Jobs had promised, to get rid of accessories, to put these kinds of things directly inside you, to put these kinds of things so that there's no outside technology. The technology is built into you. So at some point, and it might take 10 or 15 years, though Elon Musk thinks he'll have a product, a brain implant on the market within 3 or 4 years, the idea here is that how can this facilitate our interaction with each other, maybe our government services with each other, where we can just directly have things in our head, we can think to one another. I mean, imagine if you're at the airport, you don't have to carry your passport, you just simply scan your passport in your mind to the immigration officer and walk right through. How much faster is that type of service than one where you actually have to have a passport printed in the first place and go get it, have it mailed to you? So there's a lot of benefits that might come from brain implants. And again, the CEOs of these companies think they're going to have something on the market within 5 to 10 years. The question is, will people want to have them? And will they be functional in the way that we want them to? These are things we're not sure of yet. But I think it's absolutely the future no matter how we look at it. Beyond, implants and things we put in our body, it's just ideas of different types of realities, especially when you think about government services. I mean, already there are millions of people that live in different types of worlds in the United States, either in Second Life and things like that, where they have currencies, they have politics, they vote for different types of people in government. I mean, Second Life has become, a multi-million user forum. But it's beyond that. It's more the augmented reality. If you're in surgery, or if you go to, let's say you want to get a driver's license, you have a person who shows up as just a hologram or augmented image. We're going to get into holograms in a second. And these are the different ways that you can more quickly enable yourself to get to these services or profit from them, or just make it so that the customer experience is dramatically easier. But augmented reality is probably going to be very important. And I didn't really talk much about it, but if you look at the right-hand side, the FDA in America has already approved this. So we already have kind of essentially a fake eyeball, which allows you to see closer than the normal human eye would see. This eyeball could be also considered a brain implant because it's tied directly into the brain. But the more important part of that is really that you can also put augmented realities. Yeah, they'll take it off. Sorry about the feedback. We've been having a little issue. But the idea with augmented reality is that you can ultimately have it all over. And if you have some of these other devices, implants, including eye implants, then you might be able to stream stuff directly through and have augmented reality. So if you're driving, for example, at night, it's not the car that provides the augmented reality. It's the actual eyeball that would be synthetic in your eye. There are about 6 different universities and companies around the world working on what we call a synthetic cyborg eye. One that would see a lot better, one that would allow you to do a lot more functions, and one that would actually be able to stream these different types of realities directly through it, including movies or Facebook or things like that. And I think one of the best things about the eyeball as well is the safety factor. For example, some of the new eyes see poisonous gases in the dark, and if you walk into a room and your child is in the crib and there's carbon monoxide in the room, or there's some type of smoke, a fake eyeball, a synthetic eyeball, would be able to register some of these things. So there's a reasons that many people would eventually upgrade to some of these things. And again, like I said, there's 6 different universities and companies around the world that are working on this, and one has already had it FDA approved in the United States. So we also have the idea of 3D projected imagery happening all over now, and I'm not sure if there's much happening in Dubai, but if you've been to some of the concerts recently in the United States, there are a number of people projecting things on different walls and just in 3D ways that you can actually see it in holographic ways. And imagine if you're trying to sell a government service on a very popular beach in Dubai, all of a sudden you would be able to have something that's 500 meters long and say, okay, this is the new way to do this, or this is the new way to do this. And of course, it's very cost effective. It's just something you can beam out to people so that they can see it. But it goes beyond that too. The idea is, as I mentioned before, people are starting to work a lot in virtual reality and in Second Life and some of these other places. I actually campaigned in Second Life to try to win votes during my presidential campaign. But already, for example, when Obama and even Trump and other people were trying to run for office, they had in virtual reality different types of ads and different types of kind of messages in these different systems. So if you're trying to reach other people in government, especially young people, that's another method to do it. But I think one of the most important kind of technologies coming out in terms of maybe how government could reach out to people is holographic imaging. Unfortunately, it replaces jobs, so that's a big challenge. But the idea is that because of artificial intelligence, we now can have interactive holographic imagery where you can actually beam something down and interact with somebody. Now, the technology on that end is still very new, but we already have pre-recorded holographic technology where you could, for example, in a government entity, just stream whatever it is that you want to tell people and do it. And of course, this works really well if you have, let's say, a fire in a building and you want someone to point to where the exits are. These are the kinds of things that you can have pre-programmed so that you would have a much, I suppose, safer and much better service to your citizenry. Of course, holographic imagery is working very well on the campaign trail. This is, of course, a picture of Hillary Clinton. And there's a very good chance by 2020 you're going to see political candidates all across the spectrum, appearing everywhere, but not actually appearing in real form. Another way that we can deal with, improving government services has a lot to do with, of course, just apps and producing more and more apps and apps that are much more simple to use. One of the problems with a lot of the apps, at least in the United States right now, from the government, is that they're incredibly slow and complex, and they're kind of laborious. The one way to do it is just to make it really, really simple, and that way you could kind of have a mirrored amount of them out across the spectrum of apps so that people can help themselves. But one thing it requires is a lot of new developers and making it simple enough for everybody to use. But one of the coolest products on the market that I have, and I'm actually friends with the CEO of this in Silicon Valley. I live in the Bay Area in Silicon Valley. So this device essentially replaces every single light switch that you have. So imagine if you live in a house and you have 10 light switches. This goes there, and every single one of these can control different types of things in your house, can also act as a place to do, like, for example, live FaceTime, can also act as an alarm system, can also act as a video camera, can also act in terms of offering government services if that's what you want it to do. But the thing about it is that it's everywhere, it's in every room, and it very easily replaces light switches. That means that you could, in every single place, have essentially an eye watching you. Now, maybe some people won't like that for privacy reasons, but you know, privacy is something that, in my opinion, is slowly fading away as we have more and more technology that's offered to us. Now, I'm not saying we want to get rid of privacy in any way. What I'm just saying is that the world of being sort of watched and observed and offered help is becoming more and more prevalent everywhere. And so a company like this is one of the brand new products that have come out in Silicon Valley recently that people think we might all end up one day upgrading all our light switches. So it's not just a switch, it's a very interactive panel, almost as interactive as your smartphone would be, where everything can be seen and everything is being done. It's quite similar to something like Alexa in your house. And Alexa and all those other things have offered a myriad amount of different services that are much better for people. Now, of course, all these services eventually lead to what we can say is kind of the robot revolution happening. I have a 4-foot robot in my house that my kids love. So my kids have already grown up with the robots that they love, that they treat like a pet, that can do very basic AI kind of things, so it can interact with you, can read books and teach karate and things like that. But already we have robots here, and I know Dubai has plenty of them too. I've seen them. In fact, I just saw one upstairs when I was walking here called Pepper. But we have security guards and things like that. And I think eventually the government can use a lot of robotic technology in order to facilitate their services, including maybe at some point replacing jobs, which is, of course, a controversial topic. But there's no question that in 5 years' time, we're going to be able to probably replace maybe 20, 30% of most work jobs based on the robotic technology coming through the pipeline. And I don't mean just taxi drivers. I mean bank tellers. I mean waiters and waitresses. I mean, people that you would, secretaries and things like that. That's a very challenging subject for those people who have the jobs, but there's a lot of efficiencies to be made in ground in that. And if you're ultimately trying to offer better service and save money, robotics is probably the way that most people are going to go. But it goes beyond robotics. It has a lot to do actually with drones as well. Already in drones, we have been finding ourselves, huge amounts of them, literally millions crisscrossing the airspace. And that's been a big worry for the big giant airplanes that are flying above the sky. But they can do things now like deliver pizzas in America. They can carry campaign posters. They can do things like, one of the big things is I'm from California. We're having all these big giant fires right now. Well, drones have been responsible for trying to find those fires right in the very beginning so that they don't get out of control. And in fact, there's now a big giant project underway where we would be having drones flying all over places in California that are prone to burning and immediately spot the fire. In California, the thing is not a fire starting, it's a matter of containing the fire instantaneously. And so there's millions of dollars being spent on drones to try to save our forests from burning. And of course, we're talking billions of dollars of forest burning. So, a few million dollars in drones is an incredibly good investment. And one of the other things I think coming through the pipeline that could be very interesting for government is the idea that very soon, many families, and this still could be 10 years away. We thought that technology was going to be here quicker, but it's slowing down a little, but it will be here, is this idea that you can 3D print many different things in your house. And whatever that is, whether it's something even as simple as a passport, something as simple as some kind of a government-issued identity, these are kinds of things that we will be able to do in our own home in a very short time. But I think there's a lot more to it, of course. It's from a personal point of view, you can, if your child breaks a toy, you can reprint it out that way. If you're cooking something and you need to have a certain type of pan, you can 3D print it out that way. But the idea that every family will probably have a 3D printer is coming. It may take 10, 15 years, but eventually it's going to make it so that you don't even have to go to the store for many things. And that makes offering services dramatically easier and dramatically, I suppose, more efficient. And of course, a lot of what we're talking about has to be tied in with AI, which is probably the big 800-pound gorilla in the room. Already, for example, China about 18 months ago had the world record with the amount of calculations per second for artificial intelligence, and that was 33,000 trillion calculations per second. Their big giant supercomputer filled a building like this about 5 stories tall. But America broke that record this year with a supercomputer that had 200,000 trillion calculations per second. Just think of that for a second. 200,000 trillion calculations per second. That's how fast our supercomputers are getting. And when we figure out software for AI and ability to give to our machines much more intelligence, the world is going to change. Everything from drones to robots to the holographic imagery, all that is going to be interconnected through this very superior intelligence that allows our lives to be a lot easier. And of course, that leads us to, a pretty complicated supposed question, which is, do we want all these things, and is it good? And the answer is generally, well, we'll have to tread that path and see what happens, because merging with machines or interacting with machines on a very daily level is quite different than what we've been used to as a species. But that is the future of transhumanism. That is ultimately where a lot of this technology is going. And I promise you, from where I'm from, hundreds of billions of dollars are being spent on the technologies I've just talked about, so that every person in this room can have those technologies and their lives will be dramatically affected. It's coming whether we like it or not. So the question is, can we utilize it, and how should we utilize it? And of course, what are the ethical ramifications of that? Which is one of the reasons I had been running for various offices, the presidency and the governorship in California. In America, we don't have candidates that talk about science. We don't have candidates that talk about technology. We have candidates that talk about taxes, and they talk about immigration, and they talk about, the typical things. But it turns out that it's really science and technology that is most dramatically affecting our world. It turns out that it's genetic editing that's going to change the world through designer babies, or artificial intelligence that actually becomes smarter than the human species. So one of the reasons I've been running for office is to try to promote a path of science and technology in politics, so that our politicians can actually use it as guidance for the future, and not just talk about the same talking points that they've always done. And of course, I think that's very important for people in this room who are at essentially listening to someone talking about how we can use science and technology better to govern. My goal has always been to make our planet more transhumanist. I believe that science and technology ultimately will help the human species live longer, live better, higher standards of prosperity, and keep us alive longer, so that the things that we love, we can enjoy more. But ultimately, this requires kind of a cultural shift and also a social shift. The acceptance that technology is so powerful that it is life-changing, and it will do something in our lives that is not only controversial, but is obviously ultimately beneficial. So it's something to accept. But it's not always easy to try to tell people we want to create a planet full of transhumanism, because we have all sorts of issues. And I'd say the number one issue is half the technologies I just spoke about might be responsible one day for trying to replace some of your jobs. I mean, if you can do it, and artificial intelligence can do it, but the artificial intelligence is cheaper and it's maybe even smarter than you in 10 or 15 years' time, what means that you could keep your job? These are some of the huge ethical ramifications of AI, and it's not just government jobs, it's all jobs. It's, my wife is a doctor. She trained for 19 years to be an OBGYN. There's a very good chance within 15 years her job could be replaced by a robot that can deliver babies just as efficiently as her, except it can do it 24 hours a day. And it doesn't slip on a banana peel on the floor and then have to miss work. It doesn't have maternity leave. It doesn't have any of those things. We're all threatened with this idea, even politicians. There's a good chance in 20 years we might have machines that actually could govern people very effectively through algorithms that go out for the greater good. These are very challenging concepts, as we kind of decide how far we want to take this transhumanist era. But it goes beyond that. I think the one that's really important too is the designer baby age. Right now, China is already taking embryos and working on trying to augment intelligence of children. That means across the way in China, your child is going to be compared to that child, except the child in China might have 20 or 30% higher IQ, because they figured out how to genetically engineer a higher IQ into those embryos, so those children are smarter. How can a normal child compete against a child that's been enhanced with physics abilities that no one can compete against? So this presents almost a national security issue, and I do some consulting with the United States military, and I can tell you everybody's worried about this, because genetic editing is very scary. Now, nobody's doing this exactly yet. The tests are going on in China, and of course America's trying to keep up, and so is the rest of the world. But this is a possibility of the future. What color eyes, what color skin, how tall do you want your child to be, and especially how smart? These are things that they're working on right now, and it's very possible within 5 or 10 years we could start seeing the beginning of this. An entire generation. I mean, we talk about your children being better than you. They might end up twice as smart as in you. And I don't mean twice as smart because they worked harder. I mean the hard wiring in their brain is better. So these are very challenging questions, I think, from a governmental point of view, because how do you create services for entities that could be dramatically smarter than us, require dramatically more than us, demand more than us? And I think perhaps the biggest and most challenging situation that we have here in terms of what's really coming down the pipeline is really the fact that one of the greatest things Silicon Valley and where I'm from is trying to work on is stopping aging. And some people in America would even say they see aging as a disease. They would like to make it so that they never have to die. Well, whatever happens there, that's not so much the question. One thing's for sure, our lives are getting longer, and the longer they get, that means the more government services you must provide. And there's a very good chance within 10 or 15 years, your lifespan will be doubled. Unless you're 70 years or older, I'm not sure how many there are in this room, you have a very good chance of living twice what you probably would have. Unless you have a terrible tragedy, you die in a plane crash, or you get cancer immediately. But we're going to have the genetic editing techniques, and we're going to have robotic hearts and things like that to stop people from the normal things that they die from in the next 10 or 20 years. And that means many of us will live way beyond 100. And of course, that's incredibly challenging from a governmental point of view, because it means you need to provide those services a lot longer, and can we afford it? This is a very tough question. But whatever happens in the transhumanist age, I encourage you just to think about new ways of looking at yourselves and not just seeing yourselves as this biological body with, as I like to say, our brain is 3 pounds of meat. And that's really what the brain is. See yourself as something that can be dramatically different. Maybe having implants, maybe having machine parts, maybe even being part of a machine so that we can be smarter and more efficient in the workplace. Whatever happens in the transhumanist age, it's inevitable that a lot of these things are coming. And the best way, I think, to manage the transhumanist age is to manage a lot of the companies creating these radical technologies is to have the government lead the way. And in order for the government to lead the way, it means people like yourselves in this room have to stand up and take charge and try to govern that and try to make real change in the world of offering services so that the world goes down a much more ethical and beneficial path than one that's maybe dangerous or maybe one that's just not as good. But thank you for listening to my talk. I'm going to invite Donish up here, and we're going to have a panel discussion. But that was my speech on transhumanism. I hope it didn't push too hard, but it was enough to just allow you to see what a lot of people in my area in Silicon Valley are working on right now and how we see the world changing over the next 10 or 20 years.
Thank you, Zoltan. I hope everyone's had enough coffee, because the first question I want to ask him, Zoltan, so you have a chip in your arm. Does that make you a cyborg?
I'm not sure really yet if the chip makes me a cyborg just yet.
Okay.
I think, generally what we would say what makes you a cyborg is when you have 3 or 4 different things. But there are people that have, I suppose the best story to tell you is, everyone remember former Vice President Dick Cheney in the U.S. presidential campaign? So Dick Cheney had a heart valve, and Dick Cheney's heart valve was controlled by Wi-Fi. So every time that Dick Cheney, our vice president, went to give a talk in public, they had to turn off his heart valve. And the reason was because they were afraid of it being hacked. So while I have a chip implant, and maybe it can be hacked, and I guess you could cut off my arm and open my front door and start my car, too, the reality is that the field of bionics and the field of Wi-Fi enabled devices inside us requires so much cybersecurity because we're very much afraid of hacking. But that said, I think it's very beneficial. The idea that you do have an artificial heart controlled by Wi-Fi allows you to speed it up if you want to run in a marathon, and it also allows you to slow it down if you want to sleep. So there are a lot of benefits to having all sorts of implants.
Thank you. Welcome to the first GXTalks. I'd like to invite Mohammed bin Talia. Please do join us for a little chat.